Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Diana Decision. I'm the Transportation Product Manager for HireRight. We're here today with SambaSafety to bring you an informative session covering driver risk mitigation, how to measure, monitor, and modify behaviors for safer driving. Hop on over to our legal slide and some housekeeping topics. HireRight and SambaSafety prepared this presentation for informational purposes only, and it is not intended to be substituted for legal advice. Should you have any legal questions, please direct them to your legal counsel. We will be sending your HRCI and SHRM credit information by email tomorrow, along with a link to the recording of this webinar. Be sure to check out our presentation resources folder. Samba has provided a copy of their 2024 Driver Risk Report, Key Trends Shaping Automotive Mobility, that you can download. If you're experiencing any audio or visual issues, please refresh your browser, or you can click on F5 on your keyboard. There's a Q&A section. You're welcome to type in any questions and answers. We're going to have time at the end of the presentation to review. If for some reason we can't get through every question, we will follow up with you within about a day or so. And after the presentation, we would appreciate it if you guys would participate in our short survey and give some feedback. Okay. All right. Our guest speakers for today are Rich Lacey, the Chief Product Officer from SambaSafety, and Ann Leshevsky, who is our Executive Vice President for the Americas from HireRight. You can review their information in the speaker folder. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ann, who has some questions, and Rich, for you to take over.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you, Diana. Hi, everyone. So just a little bit about HireRight and Samba. We have been partners since about 2017, and both of our organizations have really worked closely to provide solutions for more than about 170 plus customers. We're basically two companies working together to help protect companies' brands, assets, and to reduce risk in the workplace. Pre-employment screening and continuous monitoring are two ways to help keep your employees safe. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rich so he can actually outline a little bit about our driver risk management and actually what is that?
Great. Thank you, Ann, and thank you, Diana. Really excited to be here. As Ann mentioned, the Samba and HireRight partnership is, for Samba, one of our longest standing and most strategic partnerships. We've been working together for literally over 2 decades to help our customers, our joint customers, address the challenges around driver risk management. So really excited to be here and spend the next hour with you all. So before we dig into really what is driver risk management, I'll ask you to all think about when you hire a person. And that person might be a driver, or if not, maybe when you started your job. You know, typically you're met at the entrance of the building, the office, maybe in the, back then, maybe a Zoom call these days. You walk, you go to the break room, you get a cup of coffee, you talk to each other about your weekends, you get introduced to your coworkers, and eventually you're handed the tools of the trade, the tools to do your job. And when we think about what's the most dangerous tool that we're often handed, or we hand one of a new employee, is it a hammer? Is it a nail gun? Is it a ladder or a crane? Is it a dolly, forklift? I submit to you that it's none of the above. The most dangerous tool we often hand in a new employee is a steering wheel. And that's backed up by the data. I mean, we assume that since most of us learned to drive when we were children before we could vote, that we know how to do it. But the data, again, tells a different story. So why is it dangerous? Transportation incidents were the leading cause of workplace deaths in 2022, accounting for 22% of all workplace fatalities, which I find absolutely shocking. Something we take for granted, like driving or operating a motor vehicle, is incredibly risky. So that tells me that this is a problem worth solving, and it's something that I'm personally focused on, Samba and HireRight, helping our customers solve this issue. So what is it? Back to Ann's original question, what is driver risk management? Well, It's the process of identifying, monitoring, and mitigating the risks associated with driving in fleets and in organizations, with the goals of improving safety, ensuring compliance, and reducing overall liability. And effective risk management tools and programs integrate data to provide a holistic view of driver behavior. This data probably exists in various different departments, silos, systems, databases, spreadsheets, file cabinets throughout your organization. When you bring it all together, it can be really, really impactful. And that's really what this discipline of driver risk management is about. And why is it important? To oversimplify things, it's about crashes. It's about eliminating crashes. So, it's oversimplification, but crashes are the things that lead to all the other bad things. It can be costs associated with repair of vehicles. It's time lost due to injury. They're the nuclear verdicts, which we'll touch on, which are crazy. Brand damage. And obviously in the worst case scenario, injuries, fatalities, and tragedies. So we'll save the mechanics of how we implement a driver risk management program for a couple slides later. But that's in a nutshell what driver risk management is all about.
Great, thanks, Rich. So Rich, let's talk about some of the current trends that you see today.
Yeah, so Diana and Ann talked about the driver risk report that we've shared with you all. There's a lot of really fascinating information that's contained in there, and keep your eyes open. We're going to update it later this year with a new version. But I picked a couple ones, some surprising, maybe some not, that are really relevant here. So two of the most dangerous behaviors probably come as no surprise: speeding and distraction. There's good news here. The good news is that both of these are correctable behaviors, and once corrected can have profound impacts to reducing crashes. So let's dig into some statistics here. 3,308 people lost their lives to distracted driving in 2022. That's about 8% of fatal crashes involved a distracted driver, which is staggering. 84% of 30 to 44-year-olds said they used an app while driving in the past month. Again, we as humans think we're great at multitasking. We all probably think we're better at it than we are. The fact of the matter is humans are terrible at multitasking. And we underestimate the amount of cognitive attention it takes to operate a vehicle. And it's in the stats that distracted driving is wildly, wildly dangerous. 31, this one I thought was terrifying. 31% of employees admit that their distracted driving caused a work-related crash. That was up from 26% in 2022. So it's happening. People are distracted. Speeding, so old favorite speeding. Speeding-related violations make up the largest proportion of all violation categories when we look at our data set. And it's increasing year over year since 2020. I'm sure some of that is pandemic hangover, back when nobody was on the roads and everybody drove a little faster than normal. But it's showing no sign of correcting to pre-pandemic levels. And why that's important, nearly 1/3 of traffic fatalities are speed related in one way or another, which underscores the severity of speeding. So in summary, speeding is still the leading cause of crashes that result in losses. Distracted driving is a horribly terrible, troubling trend. You combine these two behaviors and it's really a perfect storm of risk. So again, we think about what do you do? These are correctable behaviors that with a comprehensive, multidisciplined approach, includes some coaching, some vigilance, powered by data, is addressable. Another interesting trend, I thought, maybe less obvious, is light trucks. So a lot of times I'll digress a little bit. A lot of times when it comes to driver risk management, we focus on heavy duty trucks, regulated fleets, tractor trailers. But light trucks are involved in 4 times more fatal crashes than large trucks. Part of that's a numbers game. There's more of them out there likely. But 86% of vehicles involved in motor vehicle crashes in 2021 were passenger cars and light trucks. So that's where the crashes are happening. Speed, see the previous slide we just talked about, right, was a factor in 15% of these light truck fatalities. So again, speeding, big culprit here. 15% speeding involved in light truck fatalities. In heavy trucks, it's only 7%. 22% when it comes to passenger cars. Speeding is involved in fatal accidents. Now, light and medium duty vehicles, obviously, in most cases don't require a commercial license. Therefore, they're not subject to the same regulations. Maybe they're not, drivers aren't vetted, perhaps as strict as a CDL would. But the data is telling us that the risks here, or the exposure here, is higher, and definitely something that, again, the data tells us we need to focus on. So this is not a CDL issue, driver risk management. It is a driver issue, and in fact, it's even broader than that in some cases. So my takeaway here for our attendees would be, don't get fooled into thinking this is just a regulated or commercial driving issue.
Thanks again, Rich. So let's talk about measuring driver risk and what steps can our listeners take to mitigate these risks in their business?
Yeah, so I'll take it as an opportunity again to maybe expand on who are your drivers, and then we'll talk about how you measure the risk. So the first thing is you need to know who your drivers are and who is considered a driver in your company. It might surprise you. These are not just professional drivers who drive for a living. It is their job. But these are your professionals who drive, which is subtly different. So who is a professional that drives in your organization? It could be a district manager who's driving a company truck or company sedan in the field. All right, makes sense. They're an employee, they're driving a company-owned vehicle, may or may not have a logo on the side. All right, I'll buy that. It could be a sales rep that's driving their own vehicle, and that vehicle may be reimbursed with a car allowance or mileage, or it may not. But if that person's operating even a personal vehicle for work, they're a driver. They're a driver in the eyes of the law, and they're certainly a driver in the eyes of the plaintiff's attorney. Or in some cases, even contractors and volunteers have been considered drivers. So your drivers are it's a much broader population than just the traditional commercial driver. So once you know who your drivers are, how do you start? How do you start measuring driver risk? Well, first of all, you have to ensure that you're recruiting and hiring qualified drivers. And these qualified drivers meet your safety policy. I would suspect everybody has a safety policy on file, or you're working on one. That's your criteria, your North Star on how you make a hiring decision. And this process starts with background checks, a pre-employment background check. And if your background check includes an MVR, that's great, fantastic. If it doesn't, I'd strongly consider it does, because again, your drivers are sometimes not obvious. And for regulated drivers, you want to bring a PSP in there and a SIDless report to get you that full visibility in their driving history to ensure you're bringing on a qualified driver. The second thing that is really important is establishing a source of truth for your driver information. And trust me, this is going to come in handy. You would be surprised at how many fleets or companies that we talk to that employ drivers who must have had a driving license number on file at some point because they pulled a pre-hire MVR, but struggle generating a roster of drivers that with their driver's license numbers. So my advice in the very beginning of starting to evaluate driver risk is establish a source of truth. And that source of truth can be your pre-employment background check system. It can be your applicant tracking system. It can be HRIS, your TMS, or transportation management system. It's got to be somewhere, but establish that, because that info is going to be the basis for measuring driver risk. So in a nutshell, measuring driver risk, it's look at their history, make sure they're qualified, make sure they're in compliance with your driver your safety policy, and then make a smart hiring decision. Now that's different than monitoring driver behavior, obviously.
So Rich, let's talk a little bit more about that. So how can companies effectively manage driver behavior?
Yeah, so comprehensive risk management dashboards and data aggregation used to be all custom built. And it was complicated, it was expensive, and it was really only the domain of enterprise organizations that had not only the data, but had IT expertise and could get on the IT roadmap to build these types of things. But that's no longer the case. Turnkey solutions like what we're talking about today exist, can be configured and ready to go in days. And what does it do? What does it do, and how does it work? Well, it's really about bringing data together, and it's an array of data sources. I'll probably say it 2 or 3 more times over the course of the next 45 minutes, but the more data, the better. So when I think about data, I think about telematics data, for example. Telematics data is amazing because it's really international by nature. Telematics data coming off of satellites pays no attention to state lines, borders, boundaries, and it provides us with real-time insight into behavior. At a federal level, there's the FMCSA, so your roadside inspections, violations, and crashes. Historic data, but has plays a pretty important role in both compliance and risk and safety. Obviously, connecting to state DMVs, the MVR. The MVR is interesting because it's really like a time machine. It's going to provide your 3 to 7 years of driving history, where telematics data typically is not historic. It's forward-looking in real time. Your MVR and even your CSA data provides a documented history of previous behavior. Local court information is really interesting as a trigger for activity. And then what I think of as like hyper-local information that only exists inside the 4 walls of your company. This could be job type of data, vehicle data, corporate data, or insurance claims data, which is really fascinating and interesting data when customers bring that into the system. Because what that does is it rounds out our understanding of crashes. Remember that thing that we're really in the business of trying to prevent. So you get a little bit of crash collision data in telematics sometimes. On the FMCSA data, you have visibility into crashes that are injuries, fatalities, or disabled vehicles. Your state MVR data crashes differ from state to state, but really only if law enforcement is involved. It misses the small things, the things on private property, backing into inanimate objects. Claims data rounds that out. And then the other thing, which is really fascinating about it, is that it brings a price tag, a dollar figure. So now you can start to understand the cost of risk and the benefit of avoiding risk and crashes in the future. Bring all of that information together into, we do what we call our risk cloud. We generate a comprehensive risk profile of the individual driver based on their history, their behaviors, and then we allow you to do 3 core things with it. 1, evaluate risk. Should this person be driving for my company? Do they meet my safety policy? And are they compliant? 2, perhaps the most important thing, is how do you manage and monitor and stay informed of that behavior as it evolves over time. Because if all you're doing is just doing a point-in-time check, 6 months from now, there's no telling if that person is better or worse than they were. So really understanding the real-time data and how that driver performance changes. And then third, I know I said the monitoring was the most interesting one, but really the most interesting one is the third one, which is training, because training is what gives you the tools to actually change behavior and make drivers better. We'll talk in a little bit, I'll mention no doubt why that's important in a competitive hiring environment and from a retention standpoint. So bring in data, massive amounts of data. The more data, the better. Distill it down, normalize and standardize it, create a risk profile. That risk profile is then actionable for you to evaluate qualifications, monitor performance, and coach and improve driver behavior.
So let's take it a step further. So what are the best practices for addressing the high-risk driver behaviors?
Yeah, and I'll try to back this up with more data. So I realize I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but I think the numbers are just really compelling to paint a picture. So if all you did was recruit and onboard only qualified drivers, ensuring that they comply with your safety policy at the time of hire, possibly recheck them annually, point-in-time check, you'd be ahead of most of your peers, certainly non-regulated. But you would be missing the most impactful aspect of a comprehensive risk management strategy, which is the ability to continuously monitor and evaluate driver performance and compliance. And to pull this off, you need to automate the process. And it's all we think about doing here at Samba. And when you automate the process, it reduces the overhead, first of all. I doubt there's not a single attendee here that joined this webinar because they have a bunch of free time and they're looking for a new way to fill it. We're all really, really busy. Automation frees you up to do other strategic things. And also it eliminates human error. Like, these are consequential decisions we're often making, and you need to ensure that you're programmatically measuring and enforcing your policy to maintain fairness. So when we think about monitoring, we look across our more than 9,000 customers here at SambaSafety who are monitoring a combined over 4.5 million drivers on a continuous basis. So we have a really interesting data set to look at here. We see an average of a 32% reduction of violations at the end of the first year of rolling out just license monitoring, just MVR monitoring, which is pretty impactful. Now, violations, these aren't crashes, but we know violations are highly correlated with crashes. At the end of the second year, that 32% goes to 43%. So the impact is compounded year after year. So critically important that you're continuously looking at a person's behavior as it evolves. So I think those are pretty impressive, but I'm probably biased. Enter online training, like digitally delivered driver training. This continues to impact the efficacy of a driver risk management program. So when I talk to customers specifically around training, I hear a lot of the same concerns about how do I assign courses? How do I assign driver training courses? How do I track progress to completion? How do I share on training consistently? And this one's really interesting. Consistent application of a training program is really, really important. With most things when it comes to risk and safety, if you have an inconsistent approach, it can actually create liability. And inconsistency is often an artifact of having a human making the decisions to assign training. So how do you ensure that the right driver gets the right training at the right time for maximum impact? Well, by integrating training assignment with driver monitoring, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of training assignment and ensures a consistent application or deployment of training. It moves beyond one-size-fits-all training. I'm sure a lot of us have, we get that end-of-year training on a bunch of stuff that's boilerplate, and it's the same thing as the person sitting next to us. It sometimes doesn't feel really relevant or really impactful. So it's really important that training is relevant and directed. So when we look at, again, thousands of customers that assigned over 1.5 million training courses at Samba last year, we see the impact that this can have to amplify the monitoring. So if you have license monitoring combined with training, we see, remember that was a 32% reduction in violations with just monitoring. Combined with training, we see a 77% reduction in violations in the first year, which makes sense because you're reinforcing those behaviors, delivering relevant training to drivers that are focused on improving their performance. The other thing is that thoughtful, relevant, timely training often doesn't feel punitive, and you don't want training to feel punitive. The moment it does, it loses its impact. And when it's not punitive, when it feels like it's tailored, when it feels like it's directed to you, when it feels like it's focused on making you a better driver, better employee, it's an investment in you as a driver. It's an investment in your skill set and your career. And it actually leads to retention. So in organizations that invest in, this is a broader stat, not necessarily driver training, but employers that invest in employees' careers and in skill development see a 57% improvement in retention. The other opportunity is to speaking about relevancy of training, making it more relevant to your drivers. Different drivers have different needs. When we look at major violations across our install base, tens of millions of drivers, we see that younger drivers struggle with documentation issues. This is making sure your license isn't expired, your med cert's not expired. Makes sense. It's one of those things where you tend to forget those things until you realize you have to renew your license on a regular basis. I thought more surprising was violations like maneuvers. So maneuvers is a fancy word for improper lane changes, running red lights, following too close, reckless, careless driving, things of that nature. That increases with age. So you would think the more you drive, the better you get, but there's a complacency factor there. The more you drive, the more confident you get. The more confident you get, the more overconfident you get. Bad behaviors that we learned when we were 16 just become even worse behaviors. So this is important because I'll hit on the labor shortage thing again. No surprise to anybody here. Labor shortages is top of mind for HR. Unemployment still remains low. There's a lack of qualified candidates out there, and especially when it comes to transportation and driving, we expect this driver shortage to continue to increase and get worse over the next 10 years. And when we think about upskilling and existing employees, we're going to have 4 million baby boomers retire each year. It's creating knowledge gaps in the workforce. This is hitting transportation and certain industries harder than others. So prioritizing employee development, upscaling younger generations, bringing people into these types of jobs is going to be critically important. And I'll leave you with this one when it comes to training. Nobody I have met says training's a bad idea. In fact, it's a top priority for many organizations, yet only 21% of organizations report being effective in the area of training. So, and it goes to all those things we talked about. It can be complicated, it can be intimidating, it can be hard to administer, why automation is absolutely critical.
Some great data information numbers, Rich, very impressive. So maybe we just take one step back and let's look at how let's look at the evolution of the driver risk management program and how that's evolved over the last decade.
Yeah, I've been at Samba for 11 years and have spent a decade thinking about driver risk management, driver improvement. But I will say the last 3 or 4 years have been the most exciting because things are changing fast. So the old annual MVR, which used to be the state of the art 10 years ago, is no longer sufficient. Technology is now more accessible than ever. And it's all about the data, lots and lots of data. And the more data enables better, more informed decision making. That assumes the data is simple to understand, simple to explain, and it's simple to take action on. And we know simple behind the scenes is not simple. It's very, very hard. And telematics in particular, telematics data has supercharged driver risk management because no longer are you getting these kind of infrequent signals from MVRs and CSA inspections and behind the wheel coaching. You're now getting real-time behavioral data that's coming into the system. And this is not new technology. Telematics has been around for a long time. It's just been underutilized from a risk and safety standpoint. It's been used for largely asset management. Where's my truck? Where's my trailer? A little bit of routing logistics, most efficient way from point A to point B. There was our EDL mandate a couple of years ago that really kick-started the deployment of this technology, but again, for compliance reasons, not necessarily risk and safety reasons. We're just now starting to unlock the latent risk and safety value of this data. And it's powerful because it's near real time. It's focused on behaviors. With the advent of cameras, we now have context about what happens. It provides a lot of safety for the driver themselves, because when things happen, there's now context. If there was a crash and it wasn't the driver's fault, there's now evidence of that. So we've been at Samba incorporating telematics data into the system for a number of years now, for hundreds of customers, all different sizes of fleets, 10 driver fleets, 10,000 driver fleets. We have the ability to plug into 70% of the connected vehicles, commercial vehicles in North America today. And when our customers plug in telematics into the system, again, they're seeing some pretty impressive results. They're seeing just overall decreases in risk scores for individuals and for the fleet as a whole. And that's again, allowing them to make quicker decisions on when to coach. So we talked a lot about training and getting the right training to the right driver at the right time. It's technologies like telematics that really enable that. I'll say another evolution that's been really exciting is the impact on a driver risk program on your auto insurance, your commercial auto insurance policy. This might not be the most obvious connection for some of us, but there's a couple of reasons why this is important. Is your risk and safety program can have a positive impact on your insurance relationship. The current commercial auto insurance market it's creating significant, not to overstate it, it's creating significant financial burdens for both business owners, consumers, and insurance carriers. Why is that? Claim severity. Insurance claims have risen 14% since 2020. Severity, so the cost of those claims, the severity of those claims has increased 36% in that same time. We've got nuclear verdicts. So nuclear verdicts surpassing 10 million has increased in part due to a couple things. You have people out there funding litigators. You've got the total sum of these verdicts exceeded $18 billion in 2022, which is absolutely insane. Vehicles are getting more expensive, new, used vehicles, repairs, that has an impact on repairs. We talked about distracted driving, how that's just making driving behavior really messy. And it's created a scenario where commercial auto insurance is outpacing inflation by 5 times. It's increasing 22%. It is unsustainable. So the good news is that carriers and brokers are looking for fleets to ensure that are doing something about this. So you have a scenario where you can now take a well-run driver risk management program, working with your broker, and use that to your advantage when it comes time to renew your policy. So it's an added benefit of doing the right things when it comes to risk and safety. And trust me here, I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I've seen these conversations. That comprehensive driver risk management program is going to give you leverage in those conversations come renewals.
Thanks, Rich. So what are some key takeaways and predictions that you can maybe talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I'll hit the takeaways first, and then a couple predictions, which probably won't surprise anybody. So first takeaway, when you think about bringing all this data together, creating a single score that drives your decision-making, that drives your coaching and assigning training, it can feel potentially a little intimidating. It is it is now easier than it's ever been. And through partnerships like the Samba and HireRight partnership, bringing these two capabilities together, bringing the post-hire monitoring capability in with your pre-hire background check provides a ton of efficiency. So to reiterate, it is now easier than it's ever been. The impacts are there. It's worth the time and investment. 32% reduction in violations in the first year, 42% in the second year. Add training at 77%. Supercharge it with telematics, bringing in real-time behavioral data. All has huge impact. And these are durable changes, and these changes persist and they compound year after year after year. It works, it's simple, and it plugs into the processes you have today. So, predictions. I get really excited when I think about where this industry is going in not just years, but months. That's how fast things are changing. So, more data. The more data, the better. We no longer are looking at PDF files every 12 months. We're literally getting terabytes of data flowing into the system every day and distilling that down into actionable information. You don't have to be a data scientist to understand it. And then you don't need an IT department to do this. You don't need to make the case why your project's more important than another project inside of your company. This is something that can be done for you. This volume of data is only going to increase, and when it increases, it's going to unlock all kinds of new insights and horizons when it comes to driver risk management. That's the number one thing. More data. Pretty safe prediction there. You can't have a prediction slide these days without some mention of AI or machine learning. But I think this is really interesting in our space. We're not going to use AI to make hiring and firing decisions. That I don't see that being an area we're going, nor an area we should go. But we can use AI to understand trends in the data and help customers draft, modify, tweak their existing safety policies to focus on what's important. So I look at a lot of driver safety policies, and they're all pretty similar. No DUIs in the last 7 years, no more than 3 speeding tickets, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 4, in the last 3, maybe it's 5 years. You gotta have a valid license. If it's a commercial job, you gotta have a CDL. They're all pretty straightforward. But they're based on expert opinion, They're based on past experience. They're not necessarily based on data. So questioning what's really important and what should your policy look like to make sure that you are employing the best drivers, but also that you're recruiting the right drivers, because you're recruiting that with a properly well-sized policy might be bigger than you think it is. So maybe it's not 3 speeding tickets in 3 years is bad. Maybe the data tells you it's 2 speeding tickets within 90 days. That's what you have to be worried about. So AI and machine learning are going to help us make suggestions on better policies that we can then enforce. And then the third one, generative AI. The promise here is taking massive amounts of data and providing context around the data, explaining the data, helping you understand what's important and what's not. This is an area we're spending a lot of time on, both in research and development and pilot testing. We have this vision that this is not about replacing the risk manager. It's about making the risk manager more effective, giving the risk manager confidence to act and train, retain, improve their driver base. So seen a few changes over the last decade in this space, nothing more exciting and nothing moving quite as fast as what we're seeing right now in driver risk management. I'm excited to be part of it, and it's something we're spending we spend all day, every day thinking about it here at SambaSafety.
Okay, so we're going to open it up for Q&A. We've got a number of questions in the chat. Again, if we're not able to get to all the questions today, we're going to follow up with that response to you within about a day or so. So one of our first questions is, how long will it take to get an initial report or score for a new hire?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the first stab at that from a driver perspective. I mean, if you're talking a pre-hire MVR check, that'll typically come back in a matter of seconds or minutes. You can evaluate that and score it, in the Samba platform in real time. Obviously, that can be delivered through your HireRight system as well. So in that regard, you can get a baseline score based on driver history pretty quickly. And then once you onboard a driver, if let's say you're using the full suite of capabilities, that risk profile, what we call our risk index, which is the score on an individual, that becomes more fulsome over time as additional data and context comes into the system.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. Okay, we've got another one. Bear with me. Have you seen any statistics for the risk of complacency when driving? You were talking a bit about being distracted. Anything about complacency? Yeah,
I think we see that. We touch on that in the report, but we see that in that statistic of maneuvers becoming more prevalent in older age groups. I think that implies exactly what you're talking about there in complacency. We all, over time, become overconfident and complacent in our skills and let our guard down. So, yeah, I think that is very real.
Perfect. Okay. How have things like high insurance costs and shortage of workers affected employers when it comes to driver monitoring?
Yeah, we've seen kind of 2 questions there, I think. Mm-hmm. We've seen it's been a challenging market to hire qualified drivers, and certain industries are more competitive than others, where you have drivers that will move from organization to organization for very small sums of money. So it's important, I think, that your hiring process and your screening process is streamlined, right? So that's obviously value that we can provide here jointly. 2, it's that you're focused on the right drivers. So really understanding who you want driving for you and what your criteria is, informed by your safety policy, most likely. We've seen some customers in some cases where their hiring criteria might be a little bit more strict than their monitoring criteria, knowing that I'm going to bring somebody in, I want to hire the best qualified driver. I'm not going to compromise on that. I'm going to put them behind the wheel. I know that their exposure is going to increase. They're going to drive a lot. Maybe I'm a little bit more lenient from a retention standpoint there. I think you have to be careful with that. But we've seen that as well. Now, if you can prove that you have qualified drivers, you're actively monitoring to get to the insurance part of that question, that helps you tremendously when it comes time to getting a policy or renewing an existing policy, because at some point the carrier is going to look at your driver roster, whether they sample it or not. The last thing you want is for them to start talking about excluding particular drivers on a policy. When it comes, we have seen time and time again an effective driver risk management program being used as a positive in conjunction with your broker to help find you the best rates from an insurance standpoint.
Right. Next question. Let's see, does Samba share any of the information from clients with insurance industry or any other third-party service provider?
So we do not, unless the customer, the fleet specifically authorizes the sharing of that data. So it is up to you as a fleet, as a safety manager, to determine, to choose to share that information with a carrier or a broker. Now, we do have carriers and brokers that are customers of Samba that we serve, but not by providing customer data. They procure the risk assessment directly from us.
Okay. This is a good one. How do you create a baseline score?
Yeah. So the easiest way to do it, if I was going to give you kind of a step-by-step cookbook, is you get your driver roster, import the driver roster into the system. Through our partnership with HireRight, you have the unique ability to bring your pre-hire MVR into the system. If it exists in the HireRight system, you could score the driver. Now you have all of your drivers in the system with a baseline score. That baseline score would be based off, most likely off of their MVR. If they're a regulated driver, you enable CSA monitoring. We're going to connect using your DOT number to bring in the roadside inspection, violation and crash data. We're going to continuously monitor that MVR for changes on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, depending on the state, updating new violations. And then if you have telematics, you plug that telematics in, and then that fire hose of data is going to start coming in immediately. That creates this risk index that, again, gets updated as new data comes in and shows you a trend of how their risk is ebb and flowing week over week, that you can use then to make decisions about conversations, interventions, and ultimately training. So that baseline score can happen almost instantly based on driver history data.
Perfect. Okay. This one we might be able to touch on a little bit too. So HireRight and Samba together. What does that mean if I'm a customer of both? So I think there's a couple of components there, right? If you have a setup already that has us all connected, right? There are benefits that you're gaining, much like what Rich just touched on with the MVR sync functionality for a pre-employment MVR. We also help to consolidate your billing, utilizing some of the setup that you have with the HireRight side for your billing. If you don't already have both of us enabled, then that's a discussion we can definitely reach out to you and get that started and kind of talk through what that looks like. Rich, anything I missed on that? Gaining the benefit?
Yeah, no, I think you hit on all the big points there.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Is driver monitoring mobile-based, or does hardware need to be installed into each vehicle?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the answer is no, it's not mobile-based. The way we approach driver monitoring, so obviously license history, CSA monitoring doesn't require any type of device at all. All you need there is who's the driver, what's your driver's license number, what's your DOT number. When we talk about telematics, we focus on commercially owned vehicles, which most likely have a hardware device installed or the vehicle itself is sending the data. We don't have an app we install on a mobile device or any of that type. We don't believe, quite frankly, that that's a accurate way to measure driver behavior is off of a mobile device. We focus only on vehicle data coming off the vehicle itself.
Perfect. Okay. Which driving background service is best for small commercial trucks and drivers?
I don't know that what was the first part of the question?
Which driving background service? I think based on like the number of offerings that you have, is there a recommendation for some of the smaller commercial groups?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've structured our services in a way where you can start. So I recommend everybody starts with license monitoring. That's the basic approach. If that's all you do, you still get those tremendous benefits of 32% reduction in violations in the first year and 42 in the second year. That's looking at, does this person are they qualified to drive? Do they have the right license? Is it valid? Do they have a CDL or not if it's required? Do they have the right endorsements? Do they not have a DUI or whatever I've determined to be unsafe? And then looking for changes in that as it evolves over time or changes over time. That's that's a great place to start. And again, if you're doing that, you're ahead of the curve. An organization of any size can take advantage of that. We have 10 driver fleets. We have fleets over north of 100,000 drivers that use that service. That's a great place to start. If you're small and you're regulated, put your DOT number in, plug into the CSA. And then you don't have to have telematics data coming in to leverage other capabilities like training. So start with MVR monitoring. If you have a DOT number, plug in your CSA. Consider training would be my advice for small fleets.
Perfect. Okay, speaking of training, I'm going to leverage this next question. Can you say a little bit more about what those trainings look like, the frequency or involvement of human or face-to-face trainers versus pre-programmed training, especially for an organization where it's more professionals who drive as opposed to maybe CDLs? So I think maybe a little bit more context on the training opportunities you have.
Yeah, so training isn't one size fits all. So the way we approach training is a couple different ways. We break it into vehicle classes. Everything from heavy duty trucks, medium, light vans, and sedans. So you're exactly right. Your district manager driving a sedan is very different than your commercial driver driving a tractor trailer. So we break it up into vehicle types. The training is relevant to the vehicle type. And then we have different training categories. So there are basic skill development, there's defensive driving, and then there's what we call incident-based training. So training that's directed at specific behaviors we observe. So using that array of training classes, we have over 400 training classes across those 4 vehicle types and those disciplines. It gives you a pretty expansive library to determine what training class you go to what driver. Now, we don't ask you to go pick one out of those, find the needle in the haystack and what's the course in that 400 driver or 400 course catalog. The system will actually recommend training. So new activity comes in, let's say it's a speeding ticket, comes in as an alert in the system. In that alert, the system will say, we'll recommend a training class out of that catalog based on the vehicle type, based on the activity that you can then hit a button and send to the driver. We take a focus of online driver training, digitally delivered, high quality 3D animated video. It's not a person talking in front of a PowerPoint slide. That'll bore you to death. Hopefully I didn't do that in the last 45 minutes. It's interactive, it's 3D, it's relevant to the individual. Some customers choose to combine it with live training as a multi-layered approach. We have a lot of customers that are all online these days. And it's much more, again, the timeliness is really important. So if I have a driver who's a little heavy on the accelerator, I send them that speeding class, they watch that 90-second class tomorrow before they get in the car, it's going to be more impactful than if I send them a text message and tell them I need them in a classroom in 90 days to sit through a half-day training class.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've seen that catalog. It's pretty robust. So like Rich was saying, there's an opportunity for about every scenario you have out there and then some. I do just want to be aware of the time. We've got about 5 minutes left. We have a number of questions. We're going to go through probably one or two more, but we will follow up with responses. And just a reminder, after the webinar completes, to please take our survey. I'm just going to help us continue to make information made available to you guys more relevant, more entertaining, as fun and not sleepy. I promise it wasn't. Next question we have is, as a driver moves from one company to another, does his information follow him? Maybe just a bit of an understanding on how that's housed or how it's going to move around when it comes to company names.
Yeah, that's another really great question. So the answer today is no. So the driver profile that's created by company A while you work there does not get moved to company B when you go to company B. If assuming both companies were Samba customers, that is kind of the domain of the customer does not follow you from one employer to another. The exception to that, very small, would be your PSP report, which is your history of roadside inspections, CSA violations and inspections. That background check moves. Obviously, your MVR history, your license history, if one employer pulls a pre-hire or an MVR and the other one does, they're going to see the same thing. But Samba does not move your profile from one customer to another.
Excellent. Okay. Got kind of a hybrid question. I'm going to take part of it because I think the majority would benefit from this, but does a representative meet with you to walk you through implementation settings and how the program works?
Yeah, on the Samba side, absolutely. When you become a customer, a joint customer of Samba and HireRight, we have a Samba onboarding team that helps you get up to speed, will help you upload your drivers, will walk you through how to use the application. We also have an extensive library of in-application tutorials and guides that will remind you how to do certain things. You always get trained on an application and then you come back 30 days later and you're like, hey, how did I do that? Well, we have online guides in the app that will walk you through those types of things. And you've got a customer success and support team that's always at your service if you have any questions.
Perfect. And I'll add for the HireRight side, same concept, right? We have a training team, we have an implementation team. And if you're doing the combination of HireRight and Samba, like our teams talk through that process as well and make sure that you are handheld to the start of your program and after things go live to make sure everything's running as you intended. So yeah, okay. Let's just take a look to see if we could wrap one more up. Are any of your trainings available as a sample to take a look at before they commit to a training program?
Yeah, we've got some samples available. If you hit our webpage at SambaSafety.com, there's a training library. You can browse the entire library, filter it by vehicle types, content. You can see some concepts there, and we've got some example content for you as well.
Okay, perfect. Looks like we're just hitting the top of the hour. Again, as a reminder, our survey is available for you guys. Any questions we didn't get to, I know that there's a number that you guys have shared with us that were all great questions. We're going to work to get those answers out to you in the next day or so. With that will be a follow-up to the recording, access to this. And for those who weren't able to attend, they'll receive that email recording as well, in addition to your credits. Okay, so thank you guys. Thank you, Samba team, for joining us today. Thank you for everybody who attended. We appreciate your time. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye, guys.